touch on the absolutes of softball pitching. And one of the biggest things that I have discovered, I want to say I found out, but I discovered as a coach is that it doesn't matter what amount of cues that I'm giving to a girl. If she physically can't do it, she's not going to do it. So what I've learned to do is look for just movement patterns, what I'm expecting, and the reasons why these movement patterns are happening, because we may not think that they're right, but they may be right for that child at her strength level. So there's one basic concept: the body is always going to find the path of least resistance. So what that means is, I'll give you a far off example so we have a better understanding of what that means. I've trained or tested a professional volleyball player. He's a male, and he really wants to improve his game. He could tell it's slipping a little bit, so we go through our evaluation process. He is extremely strong in the upper body, as you can imagine, not a lot in the lower body, and a very weak core. So he's still able to compete because he is just that much stronger than everybody else. But as he's aging, some of these younger guys have just as much strength, and he's losing some of his edge. So we really have to train that core and train his glutes to get him to perform better. Now, I'm not going to touch his mechanics because that's not my area of expertise, but I know as just human movement, that's what we have to go to. So we're going to talk about really probably the most common things I see in the wind up that coaches try to get girls to stop doing. First is when they load, they have a turn that happens. So when that turn happens, it is a way for the body to try to engage their glutes. So there's three muscles back there. The gluteus maximus, which is the largest muscle, helps move in this direction. There is a process called glute activation that all pitchers should be doing before they pitch, and it really drives performance immediately. I've been able to add 4 miles per hour onto pitchers just by tweaking their warm-up process. So that glute activation, and I'll give you a trick if you're trying to figure out if they need this or not. If you talk to a pitcher and you find out that she gets faster the more she pitches, so in a tournament, the later in the day, the harder she throws, she's not properly activating her glutes in the first game. And it takes that many reps of the pitch for her glutes to really start to fire, and now she's a different pitcher. She's kind of hit her peak. So the goal in the glute activation is to activate the glutes before the game, so the first pitch of the game, she's already at her peak, and then we just manage fatigue as we go through the rest of the day. And the glute is a large muscle, so it can handle a lot of stress and a lot of pitches. But that's kind of one way to figure out. So see, just a common issue, if we have girls that twist or have a hard time keeping their foot straight, it's a glute. Their butt's weak, honestly. So they're trying to move their muscles, their skeleton, to engage a different group of muscles that are firing. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. If this muscle isn't working, they're trying to find the muscles that are working to do what you're asking them to do. So is it okay? It is what it is. I don't want to say it's okay, but if we know why that's happening and we can convey that to the athlete and the parent that, hey, this is what's happening right now, because the muscle that we really want to do the job isn't working. So we got to focus on getting that muscle to do the job, and we won't have to worry about the feet again. So another just a structural issue that we find with pitchers or girls in general, is the valgus knee, V-A-L-G-U-S knee. Okay, so because our hip angle, our hips are a little bit wider than our knees, we have this angle coming in, and so it's a constant battle for girls to fight this. All right, so it is a strength issue. Something called the VMO and the gluteus medius, which is the medium-sized muscle. So those two muscles work together to balance the femur bone. So those two muscles are stabilizing the largest bone in their body. So when we have this happening, those muscles aren't doing their job properly. So I say that to say this, girls that are growing are going to be at a constant kind of battle with that, those muscles being able to control that bone, because that bone is getting larger as they get taller. So a very simple exercise would be a single leg squat. So if your pitchers, I add this into the warm-up. This is part of the glute activation process. This is something they should be doing every day. They want to maintain maintain the knee over the second toe and be able to go down into a squat. It doesn't have to be fancy or super low, but we just don't want any corkscrewing going on or twisting happening as they're going down. They need to work on maintaining that. So that's going to help train the VMO and the gluteus medius that is responsible for this and this action that they do at the beginning. So let's go transfer to the upper body. The back swing, if they're twisting, there is some shoulder tightness or weakness. So you kind of have to look at the girl. If she has good traps here, then it's probably a tightness, or you can just, manually see how far back she can reach and stretch her arm a little bit and see if it's tightness. But if she's real loosey-goosey, all right, and here's another just added fun that we get to deal with for training females is when we are growing, in males too, so I take that back, so it's really training the kids. So as they grow, right before major growth spurts, their joints get really loose. So that's the body's way of preparing for these growth spurts so they don't get hurt due to the growth. If you have a girl that's really loosey-goosey, we can't really out-train that right now because God is in control of that. What we can do is still work on the stabilization and just a ton of balance work. Really, the single leg squat is hands down, like if they can master that, everything else should be fairly easy for them. But I wouldn't try to get too creative there in balancing drills. So I would just stick to that. Core work has a lot to do with their balance, and they're all going to have weak ankles because that's just part of the growth process too. So again, I don't suggest getting real fancy with balancing exercises. Keep it simple. Keep it the single-legged squat, and that's going to correct with time what they're doing. So is it something that we battle parents and kids over if they're coming through? No, because you're going to lose that battle. It's just good for them to understand, hey, this is where we're at right now due to our growth process or our strength level at that time. And it is what it is. We're gonna work towards getting straighter because this is where the largest muscle fires, but it may not be the strongest muscle for them at that time. So I hope that clears up a lot of the beginnings and kind of the absolutes there. We really can't have an absolute as a girl's going through the growing process. What I will say for absolutes as far as speed development, the hip extension, trying to get the hips forward, it's going to be extremely hard to have any type of real power that doesn't involve hip extension, because the hip extension is going to be driven by the largest muscle in their body forward. Okay, so I prefer a real quick load and snap. Part of that is when the muscles, an object in motion likes to stay in motion, so that's a physics concept. So if I come back and I sit, now I have to restart my motion. So it's really good to go pretty quick through here and try to, rubber band effect, pull it back, release, pull it back, release. We don't want to pull it back and hold, because if you go try that with a rubber band, pull it back and hold it, you can feel it lose its pop, lose some of its elasticity. And if you do that, multiple times, the rubber band stretches and it's not, as powerful. So your muscles are very much like rubber bands in that concept. So to me, to really maximize results, that has to be a fairly quick motion with the arms. We can't come back and sit. And again, this is the trouble with the absolutes, because there's always that very small percent that are strong enough to get away without it. But they may be faster in comparison to the girls they play against, but they may not be the fastest as far as competing nationwide for scholarships and internationally for these big time scholarships. So that's, just a fun battle we get to have with these girls to try to explain to them that, the softball world is bigger than their high school conference or their high school state. So, you know, sometimes they have to figure some of these things out for themselves. But in my opinion, those are the absolutes. Or the absolute part of the beginning pitch. So another absolute, and if I've got away from this, I really want to come back to it, is the body is always going to find the path of least resistance. So the biomechanics course, if you haven't done that already, you really need to go through that. We talk about what muscles are responsible for what motions, and what motions we are really using in the pitching motion. So those are the muscles that need to be the strongest. Those are our softball muscles. This is something that I put together in the banded pitching system. If you've seen that, I've done all this thinking for the athletes and the instructors. It's in the program. The strongest, the softball muscles, the ones that need to be the strongest for pitching, are gonna get trained, are gonna get hit the hardest in that program. So if strength training is something you feel is needed, that program is going to cover it, and you really don't have to understand it. You just have to not mess it up. Just follow it exactly as it says. And it has the glute activation program in it as well, where it teaches you how to teach the athlete to warm up properly and fire their hips. And it's amazing if when you get that program, if you radar them before and after the glute activation, you'll see a speed increase right away. So it's a good way, a good sell if you have a new student coming in and you really want to show off and say, hey, I know what I'm doing. Let them warm up their way, radar them, and then make them go through your warm up, which is the activation program and the banded velocity program, and the recommendations, the activation that I'm going to have for you available. Have her go through that and then radar her, and I guarantee you they're not going to think about any other instructor. So there's an extra tip for you. So one more absolute that is a little gray, but it is an absolute. When this foot goes down, what is going to happen for the rest of the pitch has already been determined. It has already happened. So what is going to happen has already happened. So being in a great power position here, so making sure the shoulder is external rotation. The glove is going to fly out as you rotate, so I'm not strict on the glove has to be straight, but at this point of view that you're seeing in the video right now, you should see the glove. If it's a little out, that's okay, because your timing may be a little off on when you took your snapshot of the power position, but you need to be able to see the glove. Those one-arm pitchers are not in proper position, okay? So there's a great visual for you there. So as long as you can see the glove, I like this knee over the ankle, because if I'm back here, my body is essentially going to pause until that knee locks in, and now I can start using my muscles to finish my pitch. So I believe that's an absolute if you really want to develop power. And then the knee under the hip, I mean, that allows the hips to rotate before the arm. If my knee's too far away, that means my hips are really open. So I may be trying to rotate, but I'm always going to be late, and I'm not going to develop the hip-generated arm speed. There's that. And really, once girls can get through the growing process, physically growing, and they can control the pitch, I let girls loose. I say own it is the terms I use. Own the motion, own what you're doing. That's when I finally allow girls to experiment with their arms and their legs. I have three basic wind-ups that I prefer. One arm back glove on the throwing side, both hands back, or the pull into the hip. Outside of that, it can get messy. I don't like girls starting above their forehead, or really right here. This is going to throw off their balance, especially the younger girls. They're just digging themselves into a hole by bringing their hands up too high. So I like chest to forehead, and then coming back, drive the hips back, whichever they want to do it. Okay, the toe up, that's a personal preference for me. I feel better when I do that, but I have had great success I've seen great success of girls keeping the toe down and driving the hip back. So I'll go back on that. I prefer the foot down for the younger girls because they're probably not going to have the pristine college fields, mounds that are flat that, you know, I ended my career on, so I could pull my heel up and I knew where the ground was going to be every time. And it was pretty consistent every mound I pitched off of once I got to that level. So the younger girls, they're going to have big holes they're going to have to fight. So I feel it's easier to teach them to keep the toe down just so they're not having to make adjustments when the mound is off. So that's, in a nutshell, those are my absolutes. Train the body, because the body, absolutely, the body's always going to find the path of least resistance. That is an absolute. And then secondly, once the foot goes down, the rest of the pitch is already predetermined, so we got to make sure that when we go down, we're in a good position to finish how we want to. Outside of that, outside of those two things, there's really a lot of wiggle room, and you really got to learn to be flexible, as you know, especially as they're going through the growing process from about 9 to 11 years old. And I hope I confused everybody royally, but I know there's a lot of great information in there too about what to look for, what not to look for. I'll touch on one more thing, because this is a big thing I like to talk about, is hip generated arm speed. So when I'm here, if I'm in a good position, my hip can generate the arm speed. So if a girl does something crazy, but she gets in this position and her hip can generate her arm speed, I'll leave her alone. I'm always looking for the hip to come through first and the arm to be real relaxed at the end. So I guess that's back to how they land determines if the hips are going to generate their arm speed or not. So really, two things are absolutes. So yeah, great, awesome. I hope this clarifies some things. I hope this gives you some tools to use with your athletes and with your parents, and you know, ways to kind of sell yourself as a certified pitching instructor through what we're doing here, because there's a lot of there's really not a lot of absolutes, but you have to be able to develop that eventually they're all going to be doing the same absolutes. They're going to be strong and they're going to be landing in the proper power position. So great. Excited to hear feedback and questions based off this video and this course that I'm throwing together for you guys. So thank you again, and you know, let's continue learning and making this sport awesome.